Heyo, it's Guy here, and it's Tuesday, which means it's time for Off My Bridge. Today we are answering a suggestion from David Parker, 1508, who asked, how do you run diplomatic campaigns? And diplomatic campaigns run pretty much like an investigation mission, insofar as you have the following basic steps to your standard diplomatic engagement. The PCs are introduced to the two different factions, or more, but generally two different factions, that will be participating in the diplomatic space in the discussions. Then they learn the position of those two factions. Usually it will be antagonistic, or there will be a rivalry of some kind between the two. Sometimes it will be that there is a collaboration going on, and that what we don't see initially is happening under the surface. It is something that is bubbling and brewing away and will eventually erupt at the critical juncture. Either way, the PCs then need to investigate both sides. So whilst they're busy looking into the dastardly Cardassians, it's the secret Starfleet back-end that's actually trying to manipulate the whole thing to make the Cardassians look secretly dastardly and so on. So either way, the PCs are conducting investigations. And of course, they are discovering and encountering resistance to those investigations. No one wants to talk, or it's a locked away file, or there's something odd, some kind of incongruency that causes the PCs to pause and wonder about these diplomatic negotiations. What this allows is for the PCs to then negotiate between the two sides, to offer, well, yes, you were trying to get weapons onto that planet, but at the same time, you were, well, trying to make sure that those weapons were supplied in ready amounts. So actually, you both need to agree to stop doing weapons. This often will result in a crunch, so the two factions that have come together now will lock heads, or they will attempt to eliminate the PCs from the problem. After all, if the PCs are the only ones who know about the secret thing that's going on the one side or on both sides, well, then that resolves their issue. So once that has happened, the entire thing can then come to a conclusion where hopefully the PCs are going, right, and now we shake hands, for we are all friends as we have resolved all of the underlying issues, and the diplomatic event is now concluded. And that brings to a conclusion the entire mission as well. Now, of course, if you are running an entire campaign, what happens here is that you need to do something similar to what they did in Deep Space Nine. Sisko was forever negotiating between the Bajorans and Bajorans, the Bajorans and the Cardassians, the Bajorans and the Federation and the Bajorans. Because bear in mind, depending on which side the PCs are asked to intervene, will depend on which side they are skewed, and will have to launch their investigation on the other side. Just because you've got two factions, that means technically you have three potential missions, as each of the different sides creates its own kind of narrative. I would never advocate that you do diplomatic mission, diplomatic mission, diplomatic mission, diplomatic mission. It becomes very boring and repetitive. And also it means that you're going to constantly be having to have these moments of strife to engage all of the players sitting around your table. The security officer and the chief science officer don't have a lot to do during standard negotiations. That's more the captain and the first officer. Maybe one of the other departments if you make it a specific type of diplomatic mission. But the rest generally don't have a lot to do. So you want to then mix it up and add in some of the other types of adventures: thwarting, collecting, or delivering. Because effectively a diplomatic mission is a discovering mission, as the PCs are learning their way through. So to create an actual diplomatic mission, the first thing you need to do is figure out who the two sides are and what they both want, or what is causing the conflict to happen. This is a lot more complicated than it sounds, because if you think about a standard interaction, the Federation and the Klingons. Why were the Federation and the Klingons at war? Well, because there was territorial disputes, there was miscommunication and cultural understanding, there was a complete breakdown of any kind of discourse owing to the fact that the Federation didn't understand the Klingon honor system, and the Klingon honor system was by nature a conquest-based society. So how was diplomacy brought about? It was brought about by individuals fighting to make sure that it happened. And if you watch the final film of the original series with the undiscovered country, that entire film was a giant diplomatic incident. Everyone was tiptoeing around trying to prevent war from happening, whilst at the very center of it you had General Chang pushing for war, and you had Valeris, the Vulcan traitor, pushing to put the Klingons in their place. So there were multiple layers going on in that film, and it was multiple adventures in that single film as well that took place, involving almost all of the different divisions. It was a really well-crafted film and a really well-crafted diplomatic campaign at the end of the day. So once you've figured out this is what Faction A wants, this is what Faction B wants, you need to figure out how they're planning on getting it, not through diplomatic means. Diplomacy is the recourse that the Federation takes and how the PCs are invited into this adventure, but that doesn't mean that either side need to actually agree to it. Both sides might agree to sit down at the same table, but they will have plans on what they're going to do in case those diplomatic negotiations fail. You can twist diplomatic missions on their head, which is exactly what they did in Star Trek DS9, where Bashir and O'Brien are busy destroying the last remnants of a terrible, terrible, terrible virus that two warring factions have been using in their wars. The factions have come together in a reconciliatory action and are now destroying the final samples. But what is their actual solution to diplomacy? It's not to sit down and talk, it's not to destroy the virus, it's to destroy the virus and everybody involved in destroying the virus. And so we shift from this heavy diplomatic mission involving a medical officer and an engineer into an investigation where suddenly security and command come in and we start to try and unpack exactly what was going on. Why did this happen? What was this accident that both sides seem to very, very happily just accept and want to move on from? So it was a very interesting take on the standard diplomatic mission. When we look at reasons for conflict between nations, there are a few that we can dip into for some inspiration to help us to create our adventures. The first is power. There is a show of force, a domination, if you will. This effectively was what the Klingons were doing during their expansionistic era. They didn't necessarily need the resources, they were just dominating, they were just participating in battle, which their culture saw as being an honorable pursuit. Another reason for violence or for conflict to arise that may need resolution is recognition. The entire Maquis incident, which was a spectacular failure on behalf of the Federation. If you look at the way that the Maquis situation was played out, it was a failure of diplomacy that the Maquis were all wiped out and eventually annihilated completely. The only thing that the Maquis wanted was recognition. They wanted to be recognized as an independent power, as a space in which they could operate and live. But of course that wasn't being offered to them by the Cardassians or the Federation, and so as a result there was this conflict. Resources is a classic reason for there to be conflict between two different species, the Cardassians taking over Bajor, for example, or let's say, I don't know, any of the expansionistic history of Earth is often because of resources. Someone wants money or wants to gain land or access to certain things, and so they go to war. Sustainability is similar to resources, but it is a little bit more delicate. Sustainability is a culture on the verge of collapse. They are going to run out and die. This was the principal reason behind the entire film, The Undiscovered Country. Praxis exploded, the Klingon economy collapsed, and they were on the verge of extinction as a culture and as a species. So they had to sit down at the table, they had to find a way forward, otherwise they were literally just going to expire. Finally, and possibly the least defensible position, I think, is historic. We're at war because we've always been at war. Oh, this clan killed that clan 180,000 years ago and we're still fighting over it. These kind of long-running feuds are the stock standard diplomatic problem, but they usually are resolved by finding out common ground between the two. And that leads me on to my final point. How do diplomatic missions get resolved? What should the PCs be looking for? In other words, what should you as the GM be creating and seeding? Is you should be looking for ways and means that will unite the two factions together. What are they both looking for? How can they share the resources they have? How can they share the power they have? How can they recognize one another and gain strength from that position? What is the situation there? And honestly, oftentimes it's a case of the PCs finding a hidden supply of minerals in a certain location, or discovering a planet nearby that would be perfect for both of them to colonize and to use as a place to test their weapon systems rather than to attack each other, or a nearby star system that has a bountiful amount of resources and that the Federation can help them achieve or to obtain. Alternatively, it could be a rather interesting quirk in the history of both, and then that will unite them. Diplomatic missions are a lot of fun, but make sure that you try and include as many of the officers as you can, or remember, SPCs, because player characters who just don't fit into the particular adventure can always be aides, attachés, guest supervisors, setting up the conference room. I remember Neelix going to great pains setting up a triangular table for the negotiations with the Kazon, all that kind of wonderful stuff. I think that that is something that you can finesse, you can practice, you can learn, and you can certainly get better at it. And next week, we have an adventure that was designed for us by Mech Designer and submitted through to me, and it gives me a great idea. But if you are playing in my June game, please don't watch next week's video. Until then, a huge love and thank you to all of my subscribers and my patrons. You've got a mission pack as your rewards for April. I hope you are enjoying those. And your support, of course, keeps the lights on. So until next week and another adventure, I wish you long life and happy gaming.